Hello, hello. Just a moment to get everything set up. Anyone hear me? All right, I think I got all the settings right. Hey, Edith. Hey, William. Hello, hello. Got a few people coming in. I've recently been like streaming on Twitch, so it's been kind of mad at me because I'm streaming on multiple platforms. Okay, got Mike. So yeah, Edith, William, Jacob, Anna, thanks for stopping in. Hey, how's it going? Good evening, depending on where you are. Sorry, there's reverb. But one of the things about being a low scenting type is it's annoying to set up streams because you have to like figure out all the little details and how the things go together and work and all that jazz. But hello again to anyone who's just stopping in right now. Can y'all hear me okay? Just making sure. I'll ask just this one time just to make sure. If you can hear me okay, let me know. Let me know in the chat. There's probably a bit of a delay too, so as I ask that, probably takes a few seconds to catch up to the actual stream. Okay, so there's that. There's the chat here. Cool. Can I pop this out? Okay, so you can hear me? Great, perfect. I'm just gonna pop out the chat, bring it over here then. Great. So how's everybody doing? Just thought I'd you know, do a little evening stream. It's Friday. It's been a while since I've done a live stream here on the channel itself. I did, as I mentioned earlier, I did one on Twitch where I was just playing some games and hanging out. Which, by the way, if you're ever bored, follow me on Twitch because probably 2 or 3 times a week I'll just be streaming and hanging out and playing games because I play games all the time. So it's 1 a.m. where you are. Where are you from, Jacob? I imagine it's the other side of the world if it's 1 a.m. because it's 7 p.m. here. I live on East Coast, United States. So, let's see. What do we want to talk about today? Good old psychology, typology chat. Well, has anyone watched any of the recent videos? I thought today's video was one in particular that I was quite proud of because that was my own little theory that I proposed today. So if you got a chance to check out today's video, what did you think? If you saw it, I thought it was an interesting theory. Maybe cause a little stir up in how people understand things in the community. Hello, Elitas. I always pronounce it wrong. Elita. Just stopping to check in before you head off to bed, midnight here. Okay, well, thanks for stepping in either way. Archaons, I hope I'm saying that. I really appreciate you even just stopping in to say hey, you know, support the channel. So, as usual, does anyone have anything that they'd like to talk about or for me to answer question-wise? So let's talk type, let's talk psychology. What's been on your mind psychology-wise, type-wise? Any interesting thoughts, insights, questions? As usual, I am very open to answering things. Okay, so the chat here works. I tried to make the stream layout look a little better because I know the old one was getting kind of old, but the old one was getting kind of old. It is old, so. How many people we got right now? How do you tell? I don't even know. Current viewers, oh, 18. Cool, okay, cool, great. A few people in here, stopping to say hey. What's my Enneagram? Okay, that's a good starting question. So I'm not personally a huge fan of Enneagram myself. I always test as a 5-wing 4. Always. Like every single time I've ever taken an Enneagram test, I've tested as a 5-wing 4. I don't relate heavily to the 5. Like it's like, you know, like it's, all right, I get it, kind of relating. It's not like I relate to the Jungian cognitive functions of introverted intuition, for example. But 5-wing-4 is, I think, the closest I've gotten to finding a type in Enneagram. Does TI see things more in a gray way, but TE more in a black and white way? No, both TI and TE, because they're rational functions, tend to see things in a grayscale, or not grayscale, black and white manner. The rational functions in general are going to be the ones that prefer to have decided, or just decisions in general when it comes to how they're interacting with information. They're going to go about doing this separately, or two different ways. TE and TI have their own ways of rationalizing information. But if you have this as a lead function in particular, if you're a TI or TE leading type, you're going to be someone who typically thinks in black and white. Whereas the perceiving dominant types tend to be the ones who more so think in gray and are less decisive on things. There's strengths and weaknesses to both of these, obviously. So, for example, rational dominant types often have the benefit of caring deeply about the things that they're rationalizing and they're invested and interested in. So they're going to be more willing to kind of stand up and defend those things if they believe that someone else is speaking out or standing up against them, spreading misinformation, these types of things. Whereas the irrational functions are usually going to be less likely to actually like take a stance and more likely to just kind of play the weird middle ground, devil's advocate, ping pong kind of thing with the idea, where they don't want to actually take a stance. They'd rather just play around with the idea. So the video was very insightful. Looking forward to seeing more of the content. I appreciate you saying that, Nate. Taylor Cunningham asks, hey there, I love your videos. You have great knowledge. I'm wondering, how did you get into typology? I casually got into typology back in like 2014, 2015. So I first took a formal MBTI in high school. I think it was 2012. God, that's almost 10 years ago now. I'm getting old. But we took the MBTI. I scored as an INTJ, and I didn't really think much of it. I was like, yeah, whatever. It's just another thing we did in class. Then 2 or 3 years later, I stumbled across it once more, and I kind of got into studying a little bit on my own. I got interested, and I started making like forum posts. I became really active over on personalitycafe.com. I was a senior moderator over there for like 2 or 3 years, actually. I was really active there for a long time, and then I got certified in 2017. I decided I wanted to see if maybe I could like take it to the next level and turn MBTI into like a career or something. So I went and did the certification process. And that was actually what inspired me to go back to college to get a degree in psychology. So typology was like my gateway drug to, to psychology. What do you think about INTJ obsession with self-improvement? Like, I can't be satisfied with what is. I'm more interested in what could be, and this kind of eliminates enjoying things in the moment. That's one of the issues that I think the NTJs in general tend to face, is that they're never really satisfied unless they feel like something is like the perfect representation of how they want it. But at the same time, it's funny because we'll always talk about how driven INTJs are. INTJs are super lazy on things that they don't care about. And I think this is one of the things that people forget to think about when they're regarding INTJs, is that with them it's like an on-off switch. They're like obsessively putting energy into something that they're really interested in, or they're just not putting energy into it at all. And it can be really hard for INTJs because they'll find that like some things are better done when they put in little bits of energy over short or over longer amounts of time, and you can achieve better results that way. But INTJs will usually have that all or nothing kind of attitude. But when it comes to not being able to be satisfied with what is in terms of self-improvement, let's see. How do you... Because it's kind of like perfectionism, right? That's an overarching kind of psychological issue we tend to see with people, even of any type, is the struggle with perfectionism. And I think that INTJs... How does an INTJ get over perfectionism? I don't know. That's a really interesting thing to think about. Let's say if I was coaching someone and they said that they were struggling with perfectionism, you would want to tell that person to maybe just take a few steps back and really like think about the things that they're doing. And if you find that your standards are too high, you have to maybe rethink what your standards should be, or reevaluate how you're approaching the thing that you're doing to meet those standards. Because you have to move in one of those areas. You either have to be willing to lower your standard, or you have to heighten your own expectations, or reevaluate the way in which you go about doing things to achieve the thing you want. And I can't say which is going to be the better one for every single person, because some INTJs, it would be better to lower their expectations, but for some, it might be better to reorganize their method. Do you ever doubt the idea of typology when you come across someone you don't get? No. For the most part, I don't, like, usually at this point, the interesting thing with typology is usually if I don't get somebody, there's usually a typology reason behind it. Maybe their functions are of an entirely different function stack than me, like the NTPs and the SFJs. Those are the kinds of people I usually find myself not getting. I don't think I've met anybody in particular that... So, well, I will say there's been typing sessions I've had with people where, like, in the first 30 to 40 minutes, it's like I'm not getting a strong reading on their functions. And it's not because they aren't portraying those functions or they don't have those functions. It's just because sometimes it takes longer to get a hold of the motivations and the intrinsic underlying reasons why people do things. Susan Dewar says, INFJ here, shy today. Well, I'm glad you said hi. Thank you for saying hi, Susan. Drink some water real quick. Probably at some point in like the next 45 minutes I'll have to take a restroom break, but tiny bladder, sorry. So, oh goodness, the chat shot quick. So Jacob says, or asks, what is your NI goal if you're willing to share? Yeah, so my kind of big personal goal that I want to achieve in life, and this is something that I've been working on and kind of internally synthesizing and developing over the past few years, is that I, first and foremost, want to be a recognized, incredible name within the field of psychology, particularly clinical psychology. Typology is interesting to me, but as I move forward in my professional career, I'm more interested in clinical psychology. But one thing I really want to do in the future, and the reason I chose YouTube as a platform, and the reason I still make YouTube videos, despite the fact that it might come off as like not traditionally academic, is because I think that traditional academia, in terms of research and then publishing these papers and then, you know, like people not reading those papers, I think traditional academia is dying. And I think it's being replaced by people like Jordan Peterson, for example, who are able to lead intellectual revolutions through ideas online. Even through, you know, they can present their research in a way other than a formal academic paper. They can say, I've done this research and I know how to present it. And I think one of the things that I want to do as an individual is take really complex information related to psychology as I do my research in the future. So I want to do research and then take the essence of that information and turn it into something presentable to a general public so that they can understand and use that information. More than 90%, this is just me making up a number, but I know it's something relatively close to this, around 90% of academic papers that get published every single year never get cited ever. Like, or maybe at most like 1 to 5 times. And that's a shame, because it's not because these papers aren't worthy of being cited. It's because formal academia and the ivory tower thinking that is present now in academia is dying, in my opinion, and it's no longer a valid way to exclusively present information. I think if you want to publish a paper, you should still publish research papers, but you have to do more than that. You can't just publish a research paper and go, okay, it's done, you know, it's out there for the world to see. You have to understand, how am I going to take this information and present it to the masses in some meaningful way? And that's one of the big issues with formal academic papers as well, is when they're written to be scientific. And that means anyone who doesn't have a bachelor's degree or the equivalent level of knowledge, they're just not going to be able to understand it. If you took someone off the street and asked them to read a PhD level publication in a, you know, like psychology or something, they would have no idea what they're reading. So what you have to be able to do is take that complex information and take the essence of it and turn it into something valuable and presentable to the general public. So my goal is to kind of do that in the future as I get my PhD. Hopefully one day, this is my second unsuccessful cycle with PhDs. So hopefully next fall, not this coming fall, but the fall after, I'll be in a PhD program, because I did not have any luck this year, sadly. Okay. So, does having NE as one of your top 2 functions, NPs, necessarily mean that your behavior will be more wacky and off the wall? My friend relates to NE, but it's very normal behaviorally. No, it doesn't mean that you're going to be wacky. I do find that the NE is associated with the trickster archetype, and I have a video on that. And I think that they can occasionally... It doesn't have to be wacky. There's multiple presentations. So another way that your friend might portray themselves is sly or cunning, like a fox. Because that's usually like the two different ways we could see NE presenting itself. Is really energetic, hyper, kind of spazzy at times. And then you have like the sly and cunning side of it. Almost manipulative at times because they understand the connections between behaviors and how things are going to happen. Hello there. What are some aspects of unhealthy INTJ traits and how does one overcome them? Well, so some of the unhealthy aspects of the INTJ in general are going to be associated with repressed extroverted sensing, and this is going to be usually associated with like binging things that are easy and quick to consume. This can be anything from like food, drugs. It can range all the way to harder things like alcohol in extreme cases. But it's also going to mean that INTJs are usually relatively ignorant of the details and facts associated with the things that they're really interested in. And they're going to spend less time making sure that they've done enough formal physical evidence gathering to ensure that their results are going to be correct. So INTJs can be very quick to jump the gun when it comes to conceptual understandings. And when they want to present new information, they're going to say, okay, well, I've got my understanding of it. I understand how it works and I think it's right. Now I'm going to go present it and show people this new idea that I have. But maybe they haven't done all the research, which is why it's important for INTJs to sometimes slow down and say, no, wait, hold on. I've been working on this, but I've also been thinking about it for months on end. And I think I've looked over all the details. I think I've made sure that I fact checked and I'm not just throwing nonsense out there. What do I think about objective personality? So I've met quote unquote Dave. We had a video call like this time last year. I think I reached out to him just to talk. So I have conflicting opinions on objective personality. I am not a personal fan or supporter of the system theoretically, but I think that some of the things that they've done and pointed out in relation to type and psychology are interesting and, or at the very least, helpful. So some of the insights that they've provided based on their findings and conclusions are valuable to the overall study of typology, I think. I am not a proponent or supporter of their specific model, though. But I think that if they believe in what they're doing strongly, and if they genuinely believe that their theory has validity to it, they should pursue it. I just don't think it's what they think it is, especially with the name objective personality, because they don't follow the scientific method. And unfortunately, as someone who's taken graduate level psychology classes and taken research methods, you can really see that they're kind of only half doing science. But overall, I don't have any issue with them. I just have an issue with their methodologies. Okay, sorry. There's lots of comments. It takes me a while to catch up and see. I'm sorry if I miss anybody's questions. That's just kind of the nature of live streams. How do you differentiate between an ISFP and an INTJ? Are they comfortable performing in front of other people? Is a very simple question that you might be able to ask. INTJs almost always have some form of performance anxiety. With low extroverted sensing in the function stack, they usually hate being seen doing things. They want to only be seen when it's in the realm of their competence, which is usually educational or professional. Professional performance is different from performance like casual or how do you say it? More so related to like how a musician tends to perform, those types of performance. INTJs are usually extremely uncomfortable with performances. Now, the one differing thing there is if they consider themselves really competent in the thing that they're performing within, like music, for example, INTJs can perform within those fields well. But you're usually not going to see them being too expressive in their performances. Even then, it's supposed to be some sort of presentation of their skill as an individual or something along those lines. ISFPs, on the other hand, are usually exceptionally comfortable being completely authentically themselves all the time and presenting that authentic self to the outer world. As an INTJ, how can I handle a romantic relationship with an ENFJ? Very carefully. You're going to have to learn to be patient. And I think that because, like, my wife has said that the number one thing she appreciates in me as an voice cracks going through puberty again. The number one thing she appreciates in me as an individual is my patience. I have very little to no temper. I mean, I'm human. I get mad sometimes, but even if I get mad, it's usually just like a chihuahua snip. I do not rage. I don't yell. I don't raise my voice, especially not to her. I don't raise my voice. And if you can develop that kind of patience and approachability, then you can be with someone like an ENFJ. But approachability is something that I recommend all INTJs develop in their early 20s if they can. Because most INTJs up until the age of 20 are like porcupines, I myself included. They're really off-putting and pushy when it comes to other people. It doesn't mean you have to be everyone's friend, but you have to be able to learn how to let people approach you and have conversations with you and not push people away just because. Is it true that INTPs don't make good romantic partners for anyone due to their selfishness? They don't care about pleasing others. I was told this by someone who is very knowledgeable in MBTI. No, INTPs definitely, if they're neurotic, can be extremely selfish in relationships because of lower slot extroverted feeling, the complete disregard for the feelings of another person. But this is one of the major turning points in life when it comes to INTPs. I used to have a very close friend of mine was an INTP, and he would always argue and get into fights with his girlfriend. And I would even tell him sometimes, like, hey, man, I don't think you're in the right here. Like, you know, I'm just being straightforward and honest with you. But I don't think it's inherently because INTPs aren't good romantic partners. It's because for them, they have to make more of a conscious effort in trying to kind of mediate the emotional relationship they have with other people. But I think what you find with INTPs in particular is that when they get attached to someone, because they have both that SI and the FE in the function stack, they're usually extremely dedicated to their partner. And they're usually going to kind of allow that relationship to build up strongly over time. And then occasionally they might have issues or fallouts with that individual, but INTPs usually make very, very good romantic partners if they can get past the initial struggles of developing a relationship with someone, and they can find someone who can tolerate them, to be honest. Do I type people for free? Sorry, no, I don't. If you're interested in being typed by me, you can check my website at surapsych.com. I am a certified MBTI practitioner. Dirty White Llama says, oh geez, what a live stream. Why the sad face though? Is it a bad live stream? Is my audio bad or something? Regarding books, asks EC. Hold on, I lost it. There we go. Do you think different types are more likely to be interested in reading certain fiction genres? Do you think maybe some types prefer fiction more than other types? I think there is some sort of preference. I've noticed that NTPs and SFJs, so same quadrant here, tend to like sci-fi. A lot of NTPs and SFJs that I've met particularly enjoy sci-fi, and maybe it's that TI there, the TINE in the function stack. They love the idea of like inventions and possibilities that are unknown and futuristic. My dad is an ESFJ, and he's the biggest Star Trek nerd. But I've seen other SFJs along that same realm as well. I personally, as an INTJ, I am a huge fan of fantasy. I'm a big fantasy and RPG video game nerd. I love fantasy settings. I play D&D every single week with a smaller group of friends. I used to read a ton of fantasy when I was younger. Is there any chance someone who does a lot of sports and hiking and yoga, does a lot of dance and a million tattoos is actually an INTJ or more likely an ISFP? I think it could be that. I mean, there's always going to be exceptions to the rule, especially when you're talking about only 16 types that represent a huge scope of people, 7 billion plus people. There's always going to be exceptions to the rule. You're going to have INTJs who like to dance. You're going to have ENFJs who don't like people. These are just going to be the kind of odd ones out specifically for their personality type. And I don't think this is necessarily a bad thing, but they are far and few between from my experience. Can an INTJ be really sweet and kind in spite of their stereotypical conception as cold and distant? INTJs can usually be quite kind. It's the warmth that they're usually missing, I find. At least from my experience, INTJs can be really nice and authentically nice with individuals, but they're usually not the warmest of individuals. So when they're expressing kindness to you, they're usually not going to be super, you're not going to see it much in their face, for example. But yeah, INTJs can be nice just like any other type, but they usually are relatively emotionally distant from other people. How would you explain and describe the third function slot as the kind of awkward, weird thing that people like but don't know how to use? So in terms of Jungian understanding, the tertiary function is in the same attitude as the dominant, and then therefore theoretically more valuable to us psychologically, personally, because it is in the same attitude as the dominant function. But because of this, it's in this weird, awkward state where it's not something that we're using all of the time, but we kind of really value. So for example, introverted feeling in INTJs is... Okay, no, let's separate it into introverted tertiaries and extroverted tertiaries. This is another working theory that I've been kind of thinking about for some time. Introverted tertiary functions are usually shy, awkward, and something that the introverted type doesn't want to spend a whole lot of time showing to other people because it's not something they're extremely confident in. So, for example, INTJs don't like to show people introverted feeling. ISFPs don't really like to show people introverted intuition if they have the opportunity. INTPs usually don't prefer to show people introverted sensing if they have the opportunity. But these things are still extremely valuable to them. It's not like their repressed function where they're trying to say, this isn't a part of me or it's something that I have to struggle with continuously or daily. It's just kind of something that's shy and awkward for them. Now, what I've noticed with the extroverted types is it's the opposite. The tertiary extroverted function is something that's awkward, but they want to present to other people or show to the outer world because it's an extroverted function. So ENFJs, for example, often enjoy SE-like activities and SE ways of processing information, but they're usually pretty awkward at it. And then, you can see the same thing with some of the other extroverted types as well, like ENTPs and ESTPs usually like the idea of extroverted feeling a whole lot, but they're really kind of shy and awkward at it. Oh, someone gave me a super chat here. Let me scroll down and see this, and then I'll go back up and see what's going on. Alec Kella says, if anxiety is projecting bad future outcomes, would this make INTJ anxiety more intense? Thoughts? So this is really interesting because when it comes to clinical anxiety, which is, when we're talking about anxiety, it's relatively separate from typology. Anxiety is more than just projecting future thoughts. It's an entire psychophysiological response to certain stimulus, environments, threats. Anxiety is a threat response in general. If you're experiencing anxiety, it's because your body is perceiving some sort of issue or threat to your stability or life or safety. This can present itself as projecting into future outcomes, but it can also be something like mental blocks. Occasionally I have mental blocks myself where I'm unable to find myself finishing thought processes that I'm working through. Occasionally I have some issues with like random spikes of anxiety, like 3 a.m. I'll wake up and have these little issues every now and then, but despite the fact that I'm not a very anxious person, to be honest, but I've done research on anxiety. I'm actually doing a study on anxiety right now. But yeah, I don't think it's inherently related to that. INTJs are going to probably think of more worst case scenarios than maybe some of the other types, but they also might be better at shifting or sifting through some of the bad scenarios that they have in their own head when it comes to those negative situations. But I hope that answered your question. Thank you so much for the $5 super chat. There is a lot of chat here, so if you want your question for sure answered, you can use a super chat, but of course I don't want you to feel like you have to, just to get noticed. But I'm trying to get to as many questions as I can, but there's a whole lot of them. Let's scroll back up a little bit, see if I can find 1 or 2 that I missed. EXFJs be insecure about how much or little knowledge they have and how to assert themselves over others when they need to. Can EXFJs be insecure about how much or little they know? Yes. TI repressed dominant types, especially since I'm married to one. I've noticed this, that they will get really stressed out about the idea of like looking dumb in front of other people, even though most people don't even think of this as like a concern. Like they'll like purposefully not do things if they think it's going to make it look like they don't know what they're doing. Or they'll spend an extra amount of time trying to make sure they understand something just so they don't present themselves in front of another person and feel like they're going to look dumber than they are. Or dumber than they think they are, sorry. Of course they're not actually dumb, but low slot TI can struggle to internally comprehend things sometimes as quickly as some other types, which can be an issue. But it's not because they're less intelligent, it's just because TI is their last way of processing information. Liminal silently present. Hello, Liminal. Thanks for stopping in. I appreciate it. I like all my Discord people are here. By the way, if you want to join my Discord, there isn't a link in this description box, but all my other videos should have a link to the Discord server. I am in there every single day, talking, answering questions, all that sorts of thing. So, oh, hold on, give me a second. How do you do a screen share type thing? I don't know how to do it. I was going to share something that I was working on today, but it's fine. You'll see it in a few days, most likely. I don't want to mess up the stream by trying to do something I don't know how to do. How many times have you been asked, are you upset? Why are you mad? While being completely calm? I don't get... Growing up, I wasn't often asked, why am I mad? People often asked me, like, why am I, like, sad? Or they told me I should smile. And it's one of those stereotypical things because it's funny. On Facebook, like a year or two ago, I saw a post by a girl and she was like, man, if I had $1 every time somebody told me to smile because they thought it was like a gender thing. And I was like, man, same. If I had $1 for every time somebody told me to smile. And she was like, what are you talking about? You're a dude. And I was like, yeah, I'm a dude who doesn't smile often and has a blank face. And girls would tell me all the time growing up, hey, why don't you smile more? It's, you know, it's not just exclusively a gender thing, although it does seem to have the gender bias with how we perceive it. A lot of the times growing up, people would tell me to smile, and it was like, oh, so annoying. It's just my face. Where are we now? Alita says, notice me, senpai. ENTP Gathering says, greetings. Hello there, ENTP Gathering. Thanks for stopping into the live stream. Coffee says, what's the biggest difference between ENFP and ENTP? I know the functions are different, but how does that look in real life? Well, it's really interesting because ENFPs having introverted feelings secondary are usually more emotionally charged than ENTPs, but since ENTPs have extroverted feeling, ENTPs can almost sometimes come off as more emotionally expressive. ENFPs tend to be a little bit warmer, but also very quick to reject people that don't mesh well with them. ENFPs are the kings and queens of like vibe checks when it comes to friends. They are the kinds of people who understand the type of people that they're interacting with, and then if they get a bad vibe from you, they're not going to want to interact with you. ENTPs, on the other hand, are usually the kinds of people who, because they have NE and FE, they're actually quite good at manipulating the social sphere, and that's why you'll often see negative ENTPs falling into manipulative and trickster-like states. An example of this would be Loki in the Marvel movies. He's exceptionally good at kind of manipulating people very subtly without people really seeing what he's getting at. But yeah, there's lots of differences between. It mainly just boils down to the introverted feeling versus the introverted thinking. You know, the NTPs are going to be a little bit more, I don't want to say scientifically inclined, but you know, ENTPs in particular tend to be drawn towards the sciences, where ENFPs tend to be drawn towards lots and lots and lots of different things. I think ENFPs I see have the widest range of like preferred job fields of all the types. There's a similarity in the description of any dominance and bipolar mania. Fast speech, racing thoughts, flight of ideas. What's the difference? Well, the difference is that for any dominant type, it's preferred, and it's not an issue. So in clinical psychology, when we're talking about whether or not something is an issue, the first thing we have to ask is whether or not it's intrusive to the person's life. So, for example, if we look at schizoid personality disorder, which is characterized by 99.9th percentile introversion. This is the most introverted of introverted people you're going to find. They are extremely flat when it comes to emotional affect. They don't get bothered by even the most stressful of situations usually, except maybe if it's in the realm of like social things. They're really introverted and really emotionally reclusive. These type of people often don't seek help because they don't feel as if they're having a problem because their problem isn't intrusive to their well-being. And that's what we have to see when we're looking at whether or not something is negative. So extroverted intuition in terms of racing thoughts, flight of ideas, and fast speech is something that would only be negative usually if it's causing intrusiveness, or it's being intrusive to the individual's life or causing problems for them, if it's uncharacteristic of them. Now, the issue is that NFPs, if they develop some sort of bipolar or mania type issue, they might find that the thing that once brought them comfort is no longer home to them. So the thing, talking fast, racing thoughts, these things that were comforting to them may turn against them into something that's negative. Any suggestion to INFP dating INTJ? Just be patient when it comes to them emotionally. If you're new to being in a relationship with an INTJ, I would say on average it takes at least a year for them to start to warm up to emotionally expressing. Usually maybe in the first 6 months they can be kind of really expressive, and then it tones back down because the initial excitement of the relationship wears off, and then you're going to go into that gray period where they're not sure where they feel comfortable or not for a while, and then after a year or two they really warm up and start to dedicate themselves to their partner again. But if you're an INFP, you're probably going to have an easy time because I think NFPs and NTJs just mesh very well naturally. Is there any info on functions and social dynamics, needs, arguments, and understanding, and where abuse or even accidental abuse can tend to happen if someone is ignoring your reply? So Cassandra M., I'm not entirely sure what the question is asking altogether. Specific, do you mean, is there a social dynamic theory you're referring to, or just general social dynamics in terms of needs, arguments, and understanding? Because MBTI in general is used to help understand how to better communicate and understand with someone else. That's what Briggs originally designed her system for. Jung designed it to explain the human psyche conceptually, and Briggs took that theory, and I think she was an NFJ essentially, and was like, great, how can I turn this theory into something that can be applied to a large amount of people to help them communicate better with each other? But yeah. Brain dominance is a great tool and far easier than all of the typology. Most of us also change every 1.5. Yeah. Oh geez, there's more than I thought. What do you call it when someone puts you down for your blind spot? I don't know. It depends on if they know or not they're doing it. I don't know if there's a word for it, but if they know they're doing it and they know it's an issue you have, probably a jerk is what I'd call it. Okay. Do you have a typing system that you use, or do you type with just functions? I type via class. I say that I type via classical Jungian viewpoint. So I only type using a 4-function model because I believe that a 4-function model is an accurate representation of what Jung was portraying in his model. I type in my own kind of personal way. I have a list of questions that are in a specific order that I go through, that I answer or ask people, but these questions don't have yes or no answers to them. It's not oh, you said this, so that means you're this. How you said it, how I believe you're interpreting the question, all of these things are really important in how I type people. So I use an interview typing method that I've been using for a long time, and it's been very successful for me. And other people have felt very satisfied in the sessions, so. By the way, gonna plug myself, and we're 40 minutes in. If you'd like to support my content, my YouTube channel, and maybe even suggest a video topic for the future, consider checking out my Patreon, patreon.com/AsuraPsych, or you can buy a personality typing session from me over at AsuraPsych.com, my business website. But back to the questions. Do you have an idea of Jordan Peterson's type? Jordan Peterson's a weird one. Because I talked with someone else who was relatively competent in terms of MBTI, and for a while I was because I didn't used to watch a ton of Jordan Peterson. I watched his lectures and stuff, so I didn't see him outside of the classroom. And inside of the classroom, he comes off like an NTP. But someone mentioned to me that he could be an ENFJ, and I was like, whoa, I never thought about it like that. Because he is a very emotional person. One thing I'm certain of is he's a rational dominant type. So he's either a thinking or a feeling dominant type. And I'm pretty sure he's either introverted thinking or extroverted feeling, because I don't see TE or FI in him. So that leaves the TPs or the FJs. And he could be any one of them. But I I don't really keep up with Jordan Peterson a lot. You know, I used to watch his lectures because I thought his work on Jung was really interesting, but I don't like keep up with his personal stuff. Interesting hearing your view on Briggs type. I'm wondering what type do you think Jung was, if it's possible to assess such a complex man. Everyone on the internet swears that Jung is an INFJ, and I think he's an INTP. I think you could maybe make a case that he was an INFJ, but one of the things that I think really stands out to me, and the reasons I don't think he's an introverted intuitive dominant type, is how there's an interview you can find. It's a video interview. It's still online, where he talks about an introverted intuitive woman that he worked with, and he spoke about her almost like she was crazy. Like he was talking about like how she seemed, the phrase he used was like a schizophrenic. And that's how Jung thought of introverted intuition as a function. He thought of it as this really eccentric, strange, and foreign function. And I don't think Jung thought he had introverted intuition in his function stack. Maybe he did, but I personally think that Jung was an INTP, a very developed, healthy, and exceptionally intellectual one. The fact that he wrote books and books and books and books trying to conceptualize and understand the human psyche, like he has so many books, it just proved to me that he was so interested and invested in understanding the concept that he was working with. I think he was an INTP personally, but I've never met the man, so. Where was I? Do I have any advice to INFJs on how to keep it simple? What do you mean, keep it simple? Just life in general? I would say if you're an INFJ, don't fall into like the Messiah complex unless you feel like you absolutely have to. A lot of INFJs can get into this mindset where they feel like they need to be like helping other people, and that's their calling in life. And the issue with that is that INFJs will think that they need to be helping other people without having a full grasp or understanding of who they are as an individual, and that they need to develop themselves and become psychologically complete before they can begin to help and work with other people in a meaningful way. So work on yourself instead of trying to think that your calling is to work on other people. And then once you've worked on yourself and reached kind of your own paragon state, maybe then you can begin to pass your life advice and wisdom on to others. What are indicators of certain functions, body language, speech, etc.? So I am not proficient, and I don't spend a lot of time doing symbol typing or visual typing, where people use a lot of these types of body language typings to type people. Goodness, I don't know how I stumbled over my words like 7 times there. But there are a few cues that are really recognizable for me when I'm in typing sessions, for example. Some things that really stand out are EPs. Any of the EPs will do this thing where they're very frequently looking up and around and moving their hands when they type. Or not when they type, when they talk, excuse me. And they're usually very energetic when they're looking up and around. It's almost like they're trying to conjure the words in their head by looking for them up in the clouds. I don't know exactly what it is, but they spend a lot of time looking up and around when they're talking. And I think that's just extroverted perceiving, seeking something to like stimulate their perception function while they're talking. There's a few others, though. INTJs tend to have very blank expressions, except when they're getting into extroverted thinking or presenting information. INTJs will often, much like you see me do here, I use my hands a lot to speak, and I move in very sharp and jagged motions. Extroverted feeling types tend to be much slower with their movements. They're not going to snap as much. Now, this is not 100% confirmation, but usually this is what I tend to see when I'm working with individuals. Do I know of any spiritual public figures that are ISTP? I don't. Sorry. I can't even think of a ton of ISTPs off the top of my head. One of the issues I have as an INTJ myself is I know all the theory, great, but actual real life examples are hard for me to conjure. Like when people are like, who's an INTJ that you think of that you appreciate or like, I'm like, oh goodness, what's a real life example of this thing that I've been studying for years? How accurate would you say that is the 16 personalities test? Not very if you're trying to test for cognitive functions, but it's not the worst. Like people, they love to hate on 16 personalities, but I think it's a great entry point. Not a great, but it's a good enough entry point into the theory. I just wish they would talk about cognitive functions, but they can't, because then they would admit that they're stealing from the MBTI Foundation and they supposedly have their own system. How do INFJ and INTJ see people differently at all? There's a great quote in Gifts Differing about INFJ and INTJ differences. And Briggs talks about the idea that she talked with two Coast Guard or Navy high-ranking individuals who ran boats. One of them was supposedly an INFJ and one of them was an INTJ. And she asked each one of them, what would be your first priority if the ship had got hit by a missile or something and was going to be sinking? And the INFJ responded, my first priority would be getting to the people and ensuring their safety so that we can kind of group up and figure out what we're going to do together as a group, either get off the ship, escape, do all these things. And the INTJ said something along the lines of, my first priority would be to, get to the people that are most important so I can try to turn around the situation and, make it so we can... His focus wasn't on the people themselves and getting everyone okay. It was ensuring the wellness of the situation itself. What can I do? Who can I interact with to help me fix this situation? And that was what the INTJ was more concerned with. Whereas because the INTJ believes that if the situation is fixed, the people will be okay. And the INFJ believes if the people are okay, the situation will be fixed. That's kind of the general mindset and difference between the two. Where am I? I am losing track of all the... okay. No one ENTJ who thinks he's a messiah. I'm on my last brain cell. My last brain cell was gone ages ago. The very last one, just out the door. Hope I consider astrology. Astrology is not really for me. I like the symbology of astrology, but as someone who's involved in research, in academia, if you even mention astrology, they will kick you out. No, but you don't want to talk about those types of things if you're attempting to get into formal research, unless that is the thing that you're going to be formally researching. I do think that it has a valid use on a subconscious level, though. As much as I don't really believe in astrology myself, but I think that the symbology of it is useful for people. Do you think SE is just observing, or is SE more just doing things in the moment? Like, could SE be passive, and how would that differ from NI being passive? Yeah, both of them can be relatively passive as perceiving functions. SE isn't... I don't want to say SE is doing, but SE is more comfortable doing than NI. NI wants to observe far more before it acts, whereas SE will feel like it has enough information to act far quicker than NI. SE is going to say, okay, here's the immediate information that I have available to me. What can I do with this immediate information if I need to? That doesn't mean they will act on it, but it means if they need to, what are they going to be able to do with that information? Whereas NI, on the other hand, says, okay, what can I distill from this moment? What kind of information can be pulled from this subjectively? And then what can I do once I've subjectively interpreted the situation and pulled that information? Why are so many of the famous dictators extremely unhealthy INFJs? Why do you think this happens? I think it's because FE has a large potential for negative charisma. Whereas FE can be the most charismatic of people, it can also be the opposite of that, the people who use that in a negative way. When you look at some of history's worst people, military-wise, many of them were also ENTJs, ESTJs, but the difference is that they weren't trying to be charismatic leaders. They were military leaders who wanted to conquer, and that was their exclusive goal. And because of that, we see them in a different light. We don't view them as inherently like negative people because they weren't influencing the society in the same way as an FE type person would. The ENTJ was iron fist ruling their society, or they were so competent in their military strategy that they were able to get people to follow them just because of their competence alone. I dropped my bottle cap. Jung did say some astrology stuff. Yes, he did. Jung was big into the symbology and astrology. Why do INFJs sometimes have wrong intuition? Because intuition is going to be wrong a lot more than it's right, especially in lower intuition types, but specifically SPs tend to have very bad intuitions. But NI dominant types, you know, it's like saying, why is TI wrong some of the time? It's because, you know, even if you're the most intelligent person in the world, you're going to get occasionally some problems wrong. I heard someone say that INFJ can struggle to come up with examples for things. Do you think that's the case? Yeah, as I mentioned earlier, INTJs and INFJs both can struggle to come up with real world examples for situations unless they can rationalize it through their extroverted judging function. TE is aware of structure and hierarchy. Yes, absolutely. If you look at ENTJs and ESTJs, they are very driven by hierarchy. On average, like, you know, of course, you're going to have the outliers, but almost always they tend to be driven by competency and hierarchy. Why is it so hard to figure out one's type even after researching cognitive functions heavily? It's just hard. You know, understanding yourself is the journey of life. And we can see ourselves differently all the time. You know, if someone came up to me and told me that I had gotten my type wrong for the last 10 years, I wouldn't be entirely surprised, because that's how blind we can be to ourselves sometimes. I genuinely think I am an INTJ, but if someone come up and was able to prove without a doubt that I am something else, I'd be like, that's really interesting, because that's just how psychology works. You know, we think we understand ourselves, but we really don't, and it takes a long time to really come to terms with who we are and what we really want. How would you connect the concepts of water, air, fire, and earth to functions? Okay, so I've thought about this because in my server one time we were talking about the show Avatar: The Last Airbender, and we were trying to decide like which functions would be which elements. I think earth, without a doubt, is like sensing, because it's, you know, rock solid, determined, you know, able to keep things in check, all that good stuff. I would say thinking is fire, because it's strong, aggressive, straightforward, to the point. Intuition and feeling are the ones that are hard, because I think that intuition could be water or air, and feeling could be water or air, because both of them are relatively fluid. I would say feeling aligns more with water, though, because water has that, like, especially in like Avatar, it has like that healing property to it. But I don't know. Interesting. What do you think of SE leads with heavy NI? They're usually conspiracy theorists. People, the one thing that I really don't like about the objective personality interpretation of NI is that they say that NI people are conspiracy theorists, and that's so wrong. It's like incredibly wrong. In Carl Jung's interpretation, the introverted intuitives were the ones who were able to sift through their interpretations of things to a good enough degree where they could understand what was likely to be true based on their intuitions and what was not likely to be true. People who freak out over things like conspiracy theories are the kind of people who don't have good enough intuition to differentiate what is likely a conspiracy theory and what is something that could potentially be true. So that's one thing that I was really critical about objective personality's interpretation of introverted intuition. The people who are conspiracy theorists are usually lower slot introverted intuitive types. For example, I have my oldest sister. We don't talk a whole ton, but she's an ESFP as far as I know, to my understanding, and she's still under the impression that the COVID vaccine is going to like kill her, or like it's just a scam by the government. And she literally will go on Facebook and post these types of things all day, and I'm just like, oh my goodness. And that's like an example of what lower slot introverted intuition tends to look like. It's the inability to differentiate the accuracy of your intuitive understandings. If I had to pick a study or major other than psychology, what would you pick? I would want to be a project lead on game design. I would want to work in game design. I love video games. One of the reasons you may have seen me post about the fact that I'm over on Twitch casually streaming once or twice a week is because I play video games a lot. Like I can easily play 5 to 12 hours of video games a day. If I'm not doing anything else or I don't have to work or anything like that. I've from age 3, I had a video game controller in my hand, and I've always loved video games. And I think even later in life, after I get my PhD, I might want to work with like a video game company and help them with like the psychology of like maybe narrative storytelling or direction in some sort of video game. I've always loved video games. Sappho's Petfish, you ask, how do you think ENFP4s are different from INFP4s? I don't know enough about Enneagram to accurately answer that question. Sorry. I'm not personally an Enneagram professional. I only know like the very basics of Enneagram. I typically stick with Jungian theory when it comes to type. I've seen a few INTJ musicians get types as 4-wing-5, and I'm curious if it's possible as it contradicts things. I think I type as a 5-wing-4 Enneagram-wise. I think it's very easily possible that an INTJ could be a 4-wing-5. But again, as I just mentioned, I don't know Enneagram well. Will INXJs jump to conclusions or believe that they know something after only taking a little bit of information? INJs like to jump to conclusions, but they're also very quick to change their conclusion if they feel like it's not the right one. And that's just the general nature of a perceiving function. Lead perceiving types is that they're very quick to say decisions, but they're also very quick to change those decisions if they don't align with what they think. Whereas with judging or rational dominant types, they may spend a little bit longer getting to their decisions. Not much, because they want to get to those decisions more than perceiving types do, but they're also going to be much harder to change their opinions once they've decided on the things that they're rationalizing. Can cognition truly change? Cognition can. I don't know about cognitive function. Certainly cognition can change. Cognitive function is an entirely different hypothetical, theoretical concept, though. Differentiating possibilities, which probably is easy fall into conspiracy theories. Yeah. You got it right, Liminal. Or at least I think you do. Conspiracy theories and INTPs is non-common. But so the difference with INTPs though is that INTPs are like little tricksters when they're engaging with conspiracy theories. NTPs, like you rarely see like NTP flat earthers unless they're doing it ironically. Because to them it's more about the joke or kind of like the theme there than it is about the actual theory itself. They're not internalizing and processing it in the same way as you might see with the SFPs who have that lower slot NI and can get really caught up on like those theories that they've taken as part of their identity. What are my favorite video games? So now this is TNFP. These are the questions that I want to see, right? Talking about video games. No, I'm just kidding. I do. So my favorite video games are, for one, anything by From Software. Dark Souls, Sekiro, the whole Dark Souls, everything. I love role-playing games. I love Divinity Original Sin 2 is a really good one. What have I been playing recently? Hold on, let me open up my Steam. I recently played Skull the Hero Slayer, which is a new little game that came out. I like Apex Legends a lot. I don't usually like shooters, but that's my one weird one. Devil May Cry. I'm a huge fan of the Devil May Cry series. Big fan of the Devil May Cry series. Monster Hunter. I used to play competitive fighting games. I was a Soul Calibur player and a Blaze Blue player. I haven't competed in like 2 years though because the Rona. And then MMOs I used to play a ton of as well. But I play lots and lots of video games. But like Dark Souls is definitely one that stands out to me as one of my favorites. Where was I? Do you follow a model that explains bottom 4 functions as the top 4? I follow a 4 function only model, so only 4 functions, not 8. And from my understanding and interpretation of Jung's work, that's how he proposed the psyche. At least that's my interpretation and what makes sense to me. I don't think 8 function models are effective or productive in the same way that people tend to think they are. And I think people can get too caught up on trying to work on functions that are not part of their psyche. So say, for example, if I'm working with an ENTJ in coaching, and ENTJs are one of my most common clients, and I use this example a lot when I'm telling people why I want to use a 4-function model instead. ENTJs will come to me and they say, I really need to work on my extroverted feeling because I'm just not understanding how to interact with other people, or I'm really aggressive in my communication. I can get kind of bossy, and I say, stop right there. You do not need to work on your extroverted feeling. You need to work on your introverted feeling and learn how to be a better and more competent version of yourself that people can respect. When we look at history's greatest NTJ and STJ leaders, we do not look at people who had great extroverted feeling. They are not at all representative of that function in any single way, ever. It's just not who they are. What we see is people who are extremely competent, TE, and extremely capable within their fields and are exceptionally authentic to their desires as an individual and the things that they want via introverted feeling. So to me, it's a waste of time for an ENTJ to attempt to work on extroverted feeling when they haven't even begun to master the shadow, which is introverted feeling in their own psyche. I think people waste so much time working on the functions that are not a part of their 4-function stack. And I think that if you really want to grow through typology, you should focus on the 4 functions that are in your original function stack before you even begin to think about how you should be working on these ones that aren't part of your conscious psyche. Whew. Where am I? Crack neck. Look at my shirt all jumbled up. Ugh. This is my Has-Been Hotel shirt. I love Has-Been Hotel. I think Alistair is very likely an NTP, but I still love him as a character, so it is what it is. Anyway, how y'all like my haircut? The fro. It's gone. I know, it's sad. Got a little red on my face. I'm always picking at my skin. It's like a disorder I have. I'm always just picking, scratching. It's gross. I'm a gross person. I don't know how my wife deals with me, to be honest. This SE stuff is conspiracy is totally funny. How can you type someone using SE just because the person is into conspiracy? Conspiracy mathematics here. Same. It is a learning material. It's not that SE is associated with conspiracy. It's lower slot introverted intuition that is more associated with being incorrectly invested into conspiracy theories, which are less likely to be true because they struggle to differentiate what is likely a probable or realistic outcome. But you wouldn't exclusively type them as SE and I just because of the fact that they believe in a conspiracy theory, for example. There's lots of other things you have to take into account. All right. Do you believe that opposites attract when it comes to Jungian functions within relationships and people? Yes and no. Relationships are such a weird thing because, like, there's so many different ways you could interpret and view that. Like, I think opposites attract, but I also think similarities attract because some intuitives like intuitives because they think like them. Some feeling type people like feeling type people because they're not a harsh and aggressive, but some people like some feeling types like thinking types because they're, opposite of them. It really just depends. Do I like management/sim games? it seems to me they tend to appeal more to TI than TE, right? I think the same thing. I'm not a huge fan of the management / sim games, and it could be because I'm a perceiving dominant introverted intuitive type. I like games that require more perception interaction, especially as someone who is NITE. I like games where I can be thinking quickly on my feet and interacting and trying to interpret different situations, which is why I like fighting games. Because fighting games, to me, is all about quickly getting a read on my opponent and attempting to do something about the information that I'm interpreting from them, which is like NI fun for me. TI types, I do think, tend to like those games where they can really optimize something and really play with like the rule in the system that they're interacting with. How do you SE throughout the day, in a burst or low-key sustained? I tend to do it in bursts for sure. Like, for example, as I've always talked about the idea that like I should have like a workout routine or like a schedule for how I work out and get exercise. And I have these workout bands that I use every single day. I got them like 2 weeks ago. And instead of having like a set aside time where I do like a few sets of exercises, I have them sitting on the back of my sofa. And every time I walk into the kitchen to grab something, I do like 10 or 15 pull-ups with the resistance bands. And then I put them down, and then I walk back into my room. And then the next time I come out to the kitchen, I do 10 or 15. Oh, and instead of having like a scheduled time to go take a walk or something, I'll just be sitting at my computer and being like, oh, I should go take a walk because exercise is good. So it does tend to be far more burst-like. Not a star set shirt. No, not today. I have like 3 star set shirts though. I can't talk. I know there's a huge thing with introverted types getting drained, but what is a sign that an extroverted type, I think is what you meant to type there, is getting drained from not engaging outwardly enough? That is a problem that my wife faced a lot. When COVID was first starting, for like the first 4 or 5 months, she would get really like anxious or annoyed or upset and have these kind of little outbursts because as an extroverted type, the quarantine was exceptionally hard on her psychologically. And even to this day, it's something that she struggles with because it's like, oh, I can't go out and interact with people that I care about. It depends on whether it's like going to be FE, SE, NE, TE as the lead function and how they represent that, but it's going to be usually some like angry kind of or emotional outburst or breakdown, something along those lines. The same that you would see with an introverted type when they're forced to be in a situation where they can't escape, essentially. What type is theoretically the most utilitarian? Maybe the ETJs, I would guess. Extroverted thinking dominant types. INTP, when you try to work on your FI, you slowly realize just expanding my use of my main function to, yeah, exactly. And it is my quote unquote professional opinion that you should work on your first 4 functions, and then maybe one day, if like you feel like you've absolutely mastered yourself, then you can move on to the next 4. Sarah, do you think that functions are fully separated from each other, or do you think they flow over from one thing to the next like colors do? I think the four main functions, thinking, feeling, sensing, and intuition, are completely separate from each other, except the commonalities that they share being either judging or perceiving functions. So, for example, the perceiving functions, sensing and intuition, share a little bit, like they're like perpendicular to each other. Same with thinking and feeling. But other than that, I think the reason that Jung divided the psyche into these 4 ports is because they were so drastically distinct from each other that there was no need, that they weren't close enough to be considered the same thing or overlapping. Do you think that NI-DOMs are very susceptible to nihilism and think what lies beyond religion and the world and get depressed over it, knowing that there could be nothing after death? I think NI-dominant types in general can fall into this kind of trap, and I think that's one of the greatest growth importances and greatest things of importance for their growth. Goodness, that sentence was hard to construct. Having a seizure over here. because if it's not going to be a struggle that every INTJ, for example, faces, but I think that if they fall into that trap, it's going to be bad for them, especially since once you fall into a trap of nihilism, nothing matters anymore. If nothing matters, then nothing matters, and you're not going to do anything with your life. And then they waste time because nothing matters, and then they have to reflect on the fact that they wasted a ton of time. Even when they want to climb out of the pit of nihilism, they can't because they've wasted so much time, and they feel bad about it, and they start to self-doubt. And it's just like this endless negative spiral. It takes a lot to get out of true nihilism. I'm thirsty. What's my favorite geographical region? Now, that's an interesting question. I love the landscape. I've never been there, of course, but I love the landscapes of China's mountains. The large mountains covered in forest, sometimes with little snowy peaks at the top. One of my goals before I die is to visit an authentic Chinese, like, Buddhist monk temple. Like one of the ones that you have to climb the big staircases to get to. Just because I've always wanted to do that. I think it's really nice looking. Do I believe in developing functions? For example, developing TI as an INFJ, or is this nonsense? I absolutely believe in developing functions within your 4-function stack. So not your 8-function stack, but your first 4 functions. I believe that these can be developed. But it's not like a role-playing game where you're just going to be magically like putting stat points into these functions. It's things that take a long time, and your worst functions are never going to be better than your best functions. So for example, you're never going to have greater extroverted sensing than introverted intuition if you're an INTJ. It's just kind of getting them up to the that stable enough point. How do you know there are certain functions in an individual's function stack, dominant, ox, tertiary? I mean, it boils down to how I type. Oh, how do I know where a certain function is in an individual's function stack? That I guess it comes down to the same point, really. The first thing you have to notice is how important that function is to them, and also how much of a stress is the repressed function for that function to them. So, for example, if I was seeing introverted thinking in a person, and I was questioning whether or not maybe it's a dominant or auxiliary function, I would start to push on extroverted feeling. And if I started to see a lot of stress with extroverted feeling related questions or situations, then you might be able to conclude that they're likely an introverted thinking dominant type with lower or repressed extroverted feeling. Hello, Queen's Gambit. Thanks for stopping in. I appreciate you coming to say hi during the stream. Do the functions flow into one another in a way? Yes. For example, judging functions basically create order evaluations out of the information provided by perceiving functions. Yes. They definitely work with each other, but it's almost like a handshake instead of them, like mixing 2 different colored crayons together. They're like having a handshake and giving information to one another. Like information processing in computers. At least that's my understanding. Do you think the Jungian functions are actually probably measuring or describing the right things, or are they just a reasonable and useful approximation given our current understanding? I think they are a reasonable and useful approximation. This goes back to the idea that I had in my Is Typology a Science video, and where I say that for now, my personal understanding is that at this current point, typology is not a science. It is a philosophy of understanding the human psyche that Jung proposed. And I think that it's so close to accurate in terms of representation of human psyche and how we interpret information that it can be more valuable than a lot of current scientific interpretations that we have. That doesn't mean that I don't think MBTI or type can't be science. It's just I don't think it's anywhere near that stage just yet. And as of right now, it is more useful as a philosophy of understanding human cognition than a science of understanding human cognition. For the IPs, low extroverted judging functions, those functions aren't about catering or controlling others. It's about... Oh, I thought you were asking a question. Could the position rules in the 8 model be renamed? SE and 4th function, not necessarily inferior, pathetic, but maybe very good, just narrowed rather than... So, in terms of Jungian interpretation, the 4th function is the shadow. As far as I can understand, it's the closest thing you're going to get to his archetype of the shadow. And that's why I think it's, I refer to it as that. Some people refer to the functions that are outside of your function stack as your shadow type, and I don't think that's an accurate representation. I think your shadow is your fourth function. It's the thing that's looming over your shoulder, just out of sight, whispering, sweet things into your ear, giving you nice promises of what could be, but not actually delivering on those things and causing you more issues if you attempt to agree to their terms. What are your thoughts on Dr. Dario Nardi's work using fMRI brain scans identifying cognitive function? So you're talking about Neuroscience of Personality, the book. I have that over there. I read most of it. I presented it to my lab professor because I worked under a PhD psychophysiology clinical psychologist for 2 semesters in his lab in doing EEG scans. And when I presented to him the brain maps that Dario Nardi had presented in the book Neuroscience of Personality, he was extremely critical of them. He thought that they were not very good representations of the brain mapping areas that he understood as a PhD professional in neuroscience psychology. But I don't know. Like I'm not well versed enough in neuropsychology to tell you whether or not his interpretation was accurate. So as far as I know, Dario Nardi's work is a pilot study into understanding psychology and type, and he didn't even publish a paper on it, I don't think, which makes it odd. I'd love to work with Nardi. I've actually reached out to him via email and asked if maybe he'd be interested or if he's involved in any research or doing anything. And I would love to work with him and see what he's doing research-wise related to type, because I'm curious if he's actually contributing meaningful research to the field of typology psychology, or if he's just kind of, playing that middle ground science man type thing. I don't know. Weirdly, Dario Nardi friended you on Facebook. I hear he's actually a really easy person to communicate. If you look, he's done interviews with like half the MBTI community. Like Joyce Mang has done an interview with him. He's been with a ton of people. I think Benjamin did one with him as well at one point. The shadow is like the devil on your shoulder. Yes, exactly. Kind of. It's more hidden than the devil on your shoulder. It's hard to see the shadow. That's why they call it the shadow, because it's behind you. The light is being casted upon you, and behind you're enjoying the light of your dominant function. Imagine the sun is your dominant function, and you're gazing and looking upon this beautiful, magnificent thing in the sky. But the shadow that's being cast from the light from the sun is the issue behind you that you're failing to notice because you're looking at the beauty of your dominant function. Queen's Gambit says, you agree about Nardi? Yeah, I just don't know. I as someone who worked in an EEG lab for 2 semesters, I did CAP application and I ran people through the trials, but I wasn't allowed to interpret the information on the screen. That was something that you have to have a PhD to do. We were allowed to look at the information. No one was stopping us from looking at the brain readings, but my professor could literally come into the room, point at the screen, and go, okay, they're daydreaming right now. And I would look at these colors and lines on the screen and go, how do you know that? And he goes, because this thing right here went like this. And that means right at this very moment, they're likely daydreaming. And I was like, oh my God. That's amazing. My mentor, I'm actually doing a study under him. We're working on a study on social anxiety and interpretation bias right now. And he's a really, really smart person. Lily asks, in MMORPGs, do you think INTJs are attracted to certain classes in particular? Yeah. So Lily, I don't know if you know, but last January, a year ago, I did a video called MBTI Types as Fantasy Classes. And I think that one was really interesting. I was actually working on something today about that. I wonder if I can, here, I'm going to attempt to bring it on screen and then I'll get rid of it. I'm doing a blog write-up post for that old video because I wanted to expand upon it because I love fantasy and I love video games. So today I made a little visual where I was talking about the stats and how they present themselves within the cognitive functions. Let me see if I can just drag it and drop it and then we'll get rid of it afterwards. Oh goodness. Okay, so here you can see I made this today using Photoshop. I know, amazing, right? Amazing. As you can see, I hope it's showing correctly. If it's not, My bad. Hold on. Let me look at myself in the stream and make sure it's not crazy. Okay, I think it's good. So yeah, you can see here it's the functions as fantasy RPG stats, and I've just got the symbols: TE, strength, FE, charisma, TI. All the rational functions, judging functions, are over here, and all of the perceiving functions are over here. And it perfectly correlates to the video, but I'm going to expand and do like a post on each one of these and how they relate to fantasy classes. So I hope you enjoy that. How do I cut this? Can I hide it? There we go. Okay, I've hit it. All right. Back to the chat. I haven't been looking at chat for a minute, so give me a break. Okay, here we go. Back to the questions. I am thirsty. I'm talking up a storm. You know, so people always, like, people who watch my videos will say that I'm an extroverted thinking dominant type because I talk like this, and this is just how I talk. But like 95% of my day, I don't say a word. I'm like, I just don't talk. I'm completely fine, and then it just all gets burst out in the like 1 or 2 hours that I am interacting with people like online or when I do my YouTube videos. And it's just because I have all this information sitting in my head, and it's like spewing out like a volcano. Oh, thank you, Atlas. Atlas for the 20. I'll be honest, I don't know what that currency is, but I appreciate it, whatever it is. Either way. SEK. SEK. I'm unsure what that is. Where am I? Oh, Liminal, I did answer the question on nihilism. It was like 10 minutes ago, I think. Mana plus wisdom, yes. You know, I think I had druids listed as ISFP in the video. I hope y'all liked that little visual I did there. I thought that was interesting. I'm excited to get that post going. I may even do more videos. I feel really bad. That video did so well, the fantasy video. Of course, I wasn't the first one on YouTube to do it. But I'm certainly not the last. You know, C.S. Joseph has like a whole branding thing associated with it. But I felt really bad because the one who really inspired me to kind of do that was Geek Psychology, and him and I are friends on Facebook. And I don't want to like steal his thing because I feel like gaming and psychology is like his thing. And I think he's a really smart and interesting person. If you haven't checked out Geek Psychology, go consider checking out his channel as well, actually. Tell him a Sir Psych sent you. But I like video games a lot too. They're an integral part of my core and personality. So I've wanted to talk more about that type of stuff on the channel, especially, you know, fantasy role-playing game stuff. Where was I? Oh, answer your question just a few lines after the payment. Sure thing, Atlas. What is the best way to learn in order to type people fast and accurate other than using the type grid / Linda Barrett's work? It depends on your type, Atlas. That's a complex question because I think that certain people of certain types are going to have better ways of understanding the people that they're interacting with. So, for example, if you're an NTP, you're going to have a different time typing someone compared to an NTJ. When I type people, I'm not interested in the answers in and of themselves. I leave very open-ended questions. Or I ask very open-ended questions, and I want people to take their time explaining to me the reasoning behind why they gave me that answer. And what I'm trying to do is read their body language. I'm reading the tone of their voice. I'm trying to understand the why behind the things that they're doing when it comes to how they're answering things. Sorry, my brain's melting at this point. We're an hour and a half in. But it's quite difficult because, for example, I know many of the NTPs and STPs even will do things where for them it's more like a test. Like they're testing the cognitive functions of other people, that they're trying to find certain functions by testing them through like strength and stuff. And I don't think that's really like a great way to do it. But if you want to type people fast and accurately, the first thing you should look for, the first thing I will look for when I'm typing someone is whether or not they fall into one of four categories. Are they an IJ? Are they an EJ? Are they an EP? Or are they an IP? Because these are they're very different. IJs are introverted perceiving dominant types, NI or SI. IPs are TI or FI. EPs, SE, and EJs, TE, And I think that the communication styles are so different between these four temperaments. I think I have a video called like IJ communication style or something along those lines. IJs communicate very differently than EJs because IJs have an introverted, irrational / perceiving dominant function. So the first thing I want to find is whether or not they're a rational dominant or an irrational dominant. Are they perceiving or are they judging? And then from there, we can move on to, is it thinking or is it feeling, and which one of those things is dominant or repressed? So, if they're a judging dominant type, you differentiate between T and F and find out which one's on the lower end. And then from there, you can say, okay, well, is it extroverted thinking or is it introverted thinking? But at that point, you usually already have a kind of general idea anyway. And after you've been typing people for so long, you generally have an idea of like what to be looking for with specific functions anyway. So when it comes to TI, for example, almost every person that I type who's really high in TI and function stack will stop to ask me to clarify things, because for them it's important to have a perfect understanding of what it is that they're being asked before they feel like they can give a realistic answer to it. Whereas I don't find that as often with people who have TE, who are okay with generalizing information and just kind of getting to the point. So it's those little things like that can really make a difference in how you type people and begin to understand them. So I hope that was helpful. It's really complex to ask, like, how do you type people? How do you learn how to do it? But those are just a few of my tips for how I would suggest it. Cassandra, thank you for the tip there as well. I really appreciate the support. If I see your another question by you, I'll make sure to answer it. What do you think is the best way to determine between TE and FE as to whether you are an INTJ or an INFJ? How private are you with your emotions? INFJs are usually not very private with how they feel things. And one of the questions I typically ask people in my sessions, not always, but it's one that does come up often, is, can you express emotions to other people easily if you want to? And if they answer yes, it's more likely that they're going to be along the lines of extroverted feeling. Because especially if I think they're an IJ, if I think they're an INJ, and I don't know if they're an INFJ or an INTJ, and I ask them that specific question, can you express emotions to other people easily if you want to? If they say yes, it's more likely that extroverted feeling is higher up in the stack, because INTJs and ISTJs are just not going to be relatively comfortable expressing their emotions to other people. It's just not, their natural way to interact with the world. It's just how INFJs are usually going to struggle to express their like TI opinions on things if they feel like it's going to get in the way of the FE communication that they're having. There's often an anxiety with that tertiary function. I think a lot of people will think YouTubers are extroverted judging dominance because live stream especially require those volcano moments to make them, entertaining. Yeah. And another thing that's really important is Briggs explicitly states in Gifts Differing that, and I've said this many times, is introverted types will come off as their extroverted counterparts. And if you're attempting to find someone's personality type, the first thing you should ensure is that you're not mistyping them on that basis. Because introverted types, if they're comfortable and mature enough to interface with the outer world, are going to present strongly in that auxiliary function. Go watch my YouTube videos from 4 or 5 years ago when I first started YouTube, and you can see a clear-cut difference in how I communicate as someone who's been a YouTuber for 3 years versus someone who just hopped onto YouTube and wasn't using extroverted thinking weekly. It's, there's a large difference in communication. You have to, it's something you learn and develop. What's your advice for spotting INFP from INTP? Any secrets there? INFP and INTP are really hard to differentiate. My closest friend, for my best friend of many years, for the longest time in my life, both of us thought he was an INFP, and he got so frustrated with it, he actually bought a typing session from me, and he didn't even like tell me he was going to do it, and I got in the session, and I was like, oh man, that's you. But anyway, we figured out he was an INTP after like years and years of thinking he was an INFP, and it's one of those ones where like unless you really stop to analyze the specific things that are inspiring and motivating to them, that you're going to find that it can be really hard. Because INFPs can be intellectually motivated and INTPs can be ethically motivated. And you just have to find the differences there. They're extremely subtle, but it comes down to how, for one, their pressure points. INTPs are going to have a lot more social blunders, having repressed extroverted feeling, whereas INFPs don't view their social issues as blunders. They view them as part of their identity and experience. So if they do something that's socially unacceptable, for example, they usually take it as almost a positive thing, because to them it's like, yes, I'm being my authentic self, and I don't care if, you know, other people don't like that. Whereas INTPs can often get stressed if they step on the FE toes, for example. How do IJs and IPs differ in communication style? IJs, being perceiving dominant types, are usually going to be a little bit less overt and not determined, rooted in their determination. Introverted judging dominant types, the IPs, are usually exceptionally it's not hard-headed, but it's kind of hard-headed. They're really driven to defend the things that they really deeply care about. And IJs tend to be, as perceiving dominant types, a little bit more, as I mentioned in my video today, of a yin, soft, water-like nature, where they want to be slightly more moving. But there's strengths and weaknesses to that as well, because as I mentioned, I think even earlier in this stream, the judging dominant types are going to care about these things usually much more deeply than the perceiving dominant types, who tend to be less attached to the specific ideas that they're talking about. So yeah, IPs also tend to continue to ramble on in their discussions. An IJ is doing their best to get to the point at almost any given moment in a conversation. It doesn't matter if they're going on like a 10-minute rant or spree. They're trying to finish and wrap up that sentence as quickly as possible. They want to get to the next thing and be talking about it. Whereas an IP is completely comfortable, usually, starting on a topic and then seeing if it goes into another topic, and then just allowing the things to unfold and talk about them, and one thing goes into the next, and next thing you know, you have a 1-hour video. And I think you can, if you compare and contrast INTP YouTubers to INTJ YouTubers, for example, you can see a difference in video length. INTJs usually have, 5 to 15 minute long videos. Occasionally they'll stretch out into the 20-25s if it's like a project that they've been working on. Whereas IPs will frequently have 30-minute videos to an hour-long video, We're going to go for about 30 more minutes, guys, because it's 8:30 and I want to wrap up at around 9 o'clock, because I like to run these things for about 2 hours. Because after that, my throat starts to hurt from all the talking, because this is more talking than I will have done in the past 4 weeks combined, pretty much. Says you can't super chat without having your credit card handy. No, don't worry about it. As I mentioned kind of on the screen there, I appreciate super chats, and they're welcome and appreciated. And if you want your question to have priority, you can super chat. But it's not something that I'm going to be upset if someone doesn't do. Don't break the bank for me. I am going to plug my Patreon again, though. If you want to support me as a content creator and maybe even suggest videos, consider supporting me over on patreon.com/Sarahpsych, or buying a typing session. Oh my goodness, I'm losing the chat. Where am I? I'm lost. I'm so lost. This is it. Oh, okay. Let's see. What do we got here? Cognitive empathy, slightly narrow. How to express feelings. Or the questions. Show me the questions. Your INFJ wife hates how quickly you change topics. To you, it just feels like one big topic. Yeah, that's the INTP thing. It's just one big interconnected topic. Whereas the NI types are like, no, we were talking about this thing, and when we finish this thing, we can talk about the next thing. I know that's how I am. Now, one thing that people, I don't think they notice when they talk to INTJs is INTJs can get really expressive, like surprisingly expressive, if they're talking about things that are intuitively interesting to them. So, for example, one of my favorite things to talk about is like the theories and underlying themes that run in certain video games. Like, for example, one of my favorite ones is the ancient civilization in the Assassin's Creed games. The Isu or Isu, I think they're called. If you're on my Discord, you've probably seen me rant about how cool I think they are. And you can find that INTJs will become exceptionally expressive when they're talking about these intuitive things that they don't very often feel like they get to share meaningfully. You're an INTP and literally editing your 1 hour video to only 40 minutes. Yeah, exactly. That's the issue there. I'll have a good sleep, probably. After this, I'll probably make a drink because I'm an adult and I like alcohol. Nervously drinks water. Should I admit to my YouTube base that I like alcohol? Is that a smart decision? I'm 25. I'm ancient now, so I can say that. I'm no longer a kiddo. My days are ending. Youth is far behind me. If one were to ask you how would you describe the behavior of IJs in a very concrete manner, what would you say they do? IJs are contained. As EPs are energetic and expressive, IJs are contained. I think out of everyone, IJs are the most contained, and a lot of times they're as perceiving dominant types who are introverted, they're quite observant. And maybe not in like the way that they're observant where they see everything, but it's that they're IJs are the types who like to sit back and see how things are going to unfold. ISFJs as well, ISTJs as well. People really don't give the ISJs enough credit. I think ISJs are exceptionally similar to INJs. They just have their own little gift and talent when it comes to interacting with other people, specific personality types. Talked a bit about the AC backstory quite a bit. Yeah, boy. I found out that EPs and IJs are focused on things, I think, and EJ and IP others. So that's an objective personality theory, I think. They say that, what do they call them? They call them, they created their own terms for Jung's words, observers and deciders, I think. So they refer to perceiving dominant types as observers, and then judging rational dominant types as deciders. And I don't know why they took the extra step there to do that. And they essentially said that they think that observers tend to, or perceiving dominant types tend to focus more on things and get stressed out more by things, and rational dominant types tend to get stressed out more by people. And I think that's not a bad hypothesis. I will give that to them. I think that is not a terrible hypothesis. I think it's actually something that can be relatively true. When you think about the rational dominant types, thinking and feeling, either way, feeling is involved in these two. Doesn't matter if you're feeling dominant, doesn't matter if you're feeling repressed. If you're a rational dominant type, feeling is involved. So it makes sense in some way that the rational functions are more concerned with people, whereas the perceiving functions may be less concerned with people and more concerned with other things. What are the chances of an ISFP being consistently mistyped by multiple professional services as an ETP? That'd be weird. ISFPs are gamma, ETPs are not. I don't know. Would an NE, Dom, or Ox have trouble narrowing down their type since they are thinking of all the possibilities? Yes. NPs, and I forever preach this, NPs are the types that I think are the least likely to feel comfortable deciding on a type because they want to leave their options open. I have had so many NTPs or NFPs come to my typing session who have been to like 6 other people. Like, I've had people come to me, they're like, oh yeah, I got a session from talking with famous people and C.S. Joseph and Eric Thor and, Harry from Cognitive Personality Theory. Then I came to you and I just want to get all the grounds covered. And I'm like, you're telling me you spent like $700 on getting your personality type found out? Like, that's a lot. Because despite the fact that I consider myself really competent in typing, I have one of the cheapest typing sessions on the market. I only charge $80 for a full hour. I think C.S. Joseph is $500 for an hour, which blows my mind. I don't know how he charges that much or it's $500 for 30 minutes, I think. Just crazy. But it blows my mind that these NTPs and NFPs will go to like 6 or 7 different people before they get to me, and just like, that's so much money. Like, how much money do you have? I'll type you 7 times for that much money. Yeah. Your wife says you're an INTP. Undeniably, but I still occasionally worry that I'm an ENTP. Yeah, that's understandable. Like, if you're like an INTP and you think you're like, you could be an ENTP, it's almost the same exact type. The functions are still exactly the same. If you're an INTP and you think you might be an INTJ, then you've got an issue. If the E and I are the only thing that's changing, you're going to have a better time. Yeah, put on a mask for every session. Hello, welcome to Joe Sura Psych. We're going to be typing you. No, I am not Chris. I am Joe. And I'll just make 7 different websites. Yes, all the NTPs will come to me for typing sessions. That's good. Oh boy. Let's see, did I miss anything? Thundertail, you say you're ancient too. I know you're like, what, 16? Something like that. I did a video on AC backstory. I did the Perception Consumes Reality video on, or at least I referenced the Assassin's Creed backstory. Heard of the golden pair, INTP and INFJ? Yeah, NTPs and NFJs are a lot like NTJs and NFPs. Theoretically, I think they do work very well together. I would say INFJ is more likely to get along with an ENTP, though, but I don't know. I think that the NTP NFJs just go well together in general. Do you have any theories on how cognitive functions get created, like in childhood? So, I've people disagree with this, and this is just a working opinion. I won't even call this a theory. This is an opinion. I think that in some genetic way, you are born in your quadrant. So you have essentially your 4 cognitive functions at birth. So you're at, alpha, beta, gamma, whatever. And then in your first few years of life, you pick one of these to be your main tool based on your environment and how you're interacting with your environment. And then your personality forms and shapes around the original tool that you start to use to interface with reality. Your first memory is one of curiosity, which speaks to TI dominant. Yeah, that makes sense. All of my earliest memories growing up as a kid were imagination-based and daydream-based. I had vast internal worlds that I genuinely believed that I was a part of, and I was able to rope my friends into playing pretend with me into these worlds that were a huge part of my childhood. And to me, it's just because I had this vast imagery in my head, and I still to this day I think in images. No, I don't think in images, I think in scenarios, and they're often very fantasy oriented and unrealistic. And as a child, there was no leash for them, so they just ran rampant. Saw anecdotes about identical triplets having different types and not all in the same quadra. Thoughts? I don't know. I'd love to do type research with twins or triplets one day to see if it lines up, because we know Big Five wise, twins share exceptionally similar personality traits. But the question is, cognitive function wise, do they? INTJ and ENTP is a good combo. It could be. I personally, I struggle to have long-term friendships with ENTPs because TI can get frustrating in the way that ENTPs like to play around and poke through ideas, and they can take their time, and it's kind of frustrating for someone who likes to get to the point and generalize information. I can have very good short-term friendships with ENTPs, but I do find that there's communication missteps between myself and ENTPs, and it's hard to overcome them if I wanted to be anything more than a friend with an ENTP. But I do have friends who are an ENTP. I mean, I think of like Frodo on the server. Frodo, if you're watching, I do consider you a friend. And I don't think occasionally he and I will miss the mark on some of the things we're talking about. I think most of the time, though, we're relatively close. Are certain types more likely to play pretend? It's so weird because your first instinct would be to think that intuitive types are more likely to play pretend, but in general, we tend to see that kids overall, unless they're just having their imagination crushed, tend to play pretend. Just because kids don't have a grasp of what reality is. They don't understand reality. So I think that kids in general, regardless of type, can just be in general kind of likely to play pretend. Frodo's cool. You forget he's an ENTP. He's not annoying. Yeah, Frodo is an interesting case because he's got some pretty good FE for someone his at his point in life. He doesn't have the chaos that most ENTPs have. That's another thing that ENTPs can be a problem for me. Is I like the occasional chaos, but once chaos comes to a point where it's intrusive on the social environment in an effective way, where it's like, all right, dude, like, come on, you're making people uncomfortable, like, chill out. Then it becomes an issue because, especially if it's on like my Discord server, because as a moderator, I have to step up and be like, all right, stop. I hate dealing with those kinds of situations. I don't have FE. I don't want to be the person who has to manage the social environment. I want to leave that to people who are more comfortable, and they feel like that's more of their responsibility. I usually don't even want to begin to initiate that type of thing. Difference between TI, FE, and FITE and ENFP and ENTP? I mean, it's just generally the differences between the two, between the functions overall is going to be the main differences. You got to remember that both the ENFP and the ENTP have lead extroverted intuition, so they're going to be more similar than they are different because they're sibling types. Just as goodness gracious, just as INTJs and INFJs are exceptionally similar because they share the dominant function. I have an old video on this. I recommend you check it out. I think it's called Type Siblings. When Jung described his personality types, he talked about the idea that he had 8 types because each cognitive function was essentially its own type. INTJs and INFJs are closer together than any other type, even more so than like an INFJ and an ENFJ. ENFJs and INFJs may have the exact same cognitive functions in a very similar order, but the dominant and repressed functions are way bigger parts of the conscious psyche than the auxiliary function is. And if you can look at Jung's diagram of the 4 functions and how they make up the mind to see an example of that, the dominant function is a huge majority of the personality, and that's why INTJs and INFJs are very similar, just as ENTPs and ENFPs are very similar. I describe the auxiliary function as the magnet that pulls the compass away from north. So, if pointing north is your dominant function, think of thinking on one side and feeling on the other side for the intuitive dominant types. If you're an ENTP, your magnet towards intuition is going to point a little bit towards thinking, but not completely over here. You're not going all the way over to thinking. You're just pointing a little bit in that direction. You have a thinking motivated intuition. Or if you're an ENFP, you have a feeling motivated intuition. Same with INTJs and INFJs. Do you have a thinking motivated introverted intuition or a feeling motivated introverted intuition? Any good resources to learn about cognaxis and how people phrase sentences around them? What do you mean by phrase sentences around them? Like, are you interested in just learning about the functions? Because the number one book I recommend is, Gifts Differing. And after you've read Gifts Differing, then maybe you can tackle Carl Jung. But I'm not exactly sure what you mean by the phrasing sentences, people. Anything in particular you'd look for in someone in a management position to discern INTP versus INTJ? He seems more INTP to me, but when we discussed it once, he claimed he was an INTJ. INTPs are going to have often a negative association when it comes to actually leading because of their lower extroverted feeling. INTPs can sometimes fall into the trap of feeling like they're probably really great leaders if they're in a management position, and then failing to see that the people under them may not be responding to them in the same way that they think they are. INTJs are usually cold but not cruel management people because they recognize the inefficiencies that would come along with being too cruel to individuals that they're working with or bossing them around too much. So instead, INTJs are usually people who are going to hold their people who work under them to very high standards, and they're going to expect a lot from them. Whereas INTPs may kind of hold people to standards as well, but they're going to get really frustrated if people don't meet those standards, and they're not going to exactly understand where to properly set those standards. INTPs don't have that same management-esque mindset that NTJs have. They have more of a thinking and rationalization focused mindset, understanding complex problems, which is why you don't often see INTPs in the same type of management positions that you would find NTJs in. NTPs often work well in positions that are more information focused. But you can certainly have INTPs who are good at management. I'm not saying that NTPs can't be good at management, but they're usually found in environments where their knowledge is going to be the thing that is... Their knowledge is the thing that they're presenting to manage other people. They're not directing them or enforcing them or guiding them via action or efficiency in and of itself. It's their understanding, their complex understanding of whatever it is that they're working with that allows them to effectively lead people. Got about 10 more minutes, so if you have any final questions you want to ask, now's the time before we get into the place where we're going to wrap it up. Have you noticed how people use relationships between things and functions interchangeably, e.g. having trouble with paperwork, admin, etc., having low SET? Yeah, a lot of people misattribute actions to functions. So one of the most common things you'll hear is, if I punch someone in the face, I'm using extroverted sensing, which is not how extroverted sensing works. Extroverted sensing is an information processing unit of the mind. Imagine this: an extroverted sensing dominant boxer, someone who boxes for a profession, and an introverted intuitive dominant boxer. If you're in a boxing match, are you engaging in extroverted sensing? No, you're not inherently using that if you're boxing. You're still going to be using your function to interface with the environment that you're in. Now, extroverted sensing has its own unique way of interfacing and interacting with things, and you can kind of tap into that sometimes when you're in environments that allow for that. But that doesn't mean you're inherently using that function when you do an action that we typically associate with that function. So when we talk about conceptualizing things, that doesn't mean you're using introverted intuition. You can be attempting to conceptualize something through extroverted sensing or any other function. It's just not going to be the exact same as if it was processed through that information unit or information processing unit. Much like a computer and how you send in a signal, it goes through something and then an output comes out the other side. That's much like how cognitive functions work. If you send the same signal into 8 different types of information processing units, they're going to produce 8 different results. Oh, ABG asks Asura Psych. So I have a feeling that this is a question that was eventually going to come up. Because I've always worried that someone might think that Asura Psych is like religiously focused, because Asura it is a thing from Indian/Hindu religion, but that's not why I chose it. I chose the nickname Asura back when I was like 16 or 17 because a video game character I liked used it similarly, and then I looked up what it was, and it was this representation of these things that were. It's a complex and long story, but essentially, I liked the name. I kind of liked symbolically what the thing represented, but I wasn't exactly attached to the religious meaning of it. I liked the symbology of what an Asura is. And I liked the sound of it as a name, but I didn't really care for the religious aspects of it. So I just used it as a gamer tag on Xbox for years. I still have it as my gamer tag. It's not a sort of psych, it's something else. So then I just wanted to have a nickname when I came on to YouTube. I didn't want to use my name. So I just attached the word psych to the nickname that I'd been using on Xbox for years. I've always worried that it's going to come to bite me in the butt one day when some, very religious person is like, why would you choose that name? It's religious. It's bad. It's not intended to be that way, I promise. I just think it sounds cool. Did I miss anything? Thanks for answering questions. I learned a lot from your info. I've had trouble figuring out my type, and I'm relatively certain I'm meaning fate. Well, I'm glad to have answered your questions, and thank you for stopping into the stream. And I hope to see you in the future on my channel, and maybe in my other videos or something. Feel free to leave a comment. I'll try and remember the name Coffee. I do like coffee. I drink coffee every day, so I'll probably remember the name Coffee. Let's see. I'm just trying to scroll up and see I didn't miss any cool questions before I finished. It's a lot of people just chatting with each other. Is MBTI conceptual science credible? Can we associate our personalities with the exact types we got? Rachel, I recommend checking out my video, Should We View Personality Typology as a Science, if you want like a full answer to that question. Because as I mentioned earlier in this video, I don't think personality typology should be inherently seen as a science. I think it's more useful and better represented as a philosophy of understanding human cognition than it is a scientific model. When you use something as a science and only as a science, it loses some of the qualitative value associated with it. So you lose some of the inherent and intrinsic value of a model if you're attempting to make it exclusively a science. Just like how Big Five is exclusively a scientific model, it loses some of the qualitative value of being associated with actual human needs, desires, wants, and things of that nature. Sir, a strong people killer in games. Yeah, that's... How'd you know? How'd you know my name? All right, guys. Well, we've been here about 2 hours, so I'm going to go ahead and wrap up the stream. It was a pleasure talking with you all. I hope you enjoyed this. I think I say this every time I stream. I'm going to try and get back to doing at least one stream a month. If you're interested in hanging out with me casually, I will be streaming on Twitch. On my YouTube channel, there's a little button on the channel. It's like you can see the Twitch icon. I'm going to probably be streaming on Twitch casually, playing video games and just answering psychology questions. Once or twice a week for a couple hours. So maybe go follow me over there if you're interested in hanging out more casually than with a video like this. Other than that, it's been a pleasure talking to you all. I hope you all have a great evening. Bye.